On a bone-chilling December evening, the entire city of Chicago seemed to hold its breath beneath a thin veil of mist that clung to the streets, the orange-yellow lights blurring into a hazy glow, like fog in an oil painting. While the hotels lining the wealthy neighborhood glittered like brilliant jewelry boxes, a man walked into the flagship Aurora Haven Hotel, completely unnoticed. He carried no high-end suitcases or designer leather bags, only an old, faded backpack, a pair of boots caked with salty snow, and a Carhartt jacket, worn at the shoulders, looking just like a construction worker or a long-haul trucker who had wandered into a world of crystal and marble. Not a single curious glance fell upon him. And that was exactly what he wanted. His name was Gavin Cross, the man who had founded the entire Aurora Haven hotel chain. From nothing, having once pushed luggage carts and slept in laundry rooms, Gavin had turned his dream into a luxury resort empire with over 80 locations across the United States. But tonight, he wasn't appearing in a $3,000 suit or stepping out of a long, gleaming limousine. Tonight, he was just Jake, an anonymous guest, arriving unannounced, retreating from the boardroom to search for something he couldn't yet name. He checked in with a young receptionist named Eleanor Reyes, nodded his thanks, and walked straight to the cafe in the hotel's west corner. At 9 p.m., only a few tables were occupied. Gavin ordered a black coffee and sat quietly in a hidden corner, a place where he could observe without being observed. He didn't know that in that very moment of silence, a conversation from the table behind him would make him freeze. "Are you planning on sleeping in the car? It's fine. It's just for one night. But today is our anniversary. I just wanted a little bit of normal." The voice wasn't loud, not pleading, not self-pitying, but every word was like a needle piercing through his coat, through time, and plunging straight into Gavin's chest, pulling him back to a past he had carefully wrapped up and tucked away deep in his heart for years. That story of two strangers had reawakened a memory in Gavin that had never truly slept the last night he spent with his mother, in a cheap hotel room, with bed sheets that weren't white but were clean, and the warmth of her thin, frail hands holding her son's for the last time. And from that moment, Gavin Cross, the man the press called the master of luxury, made a decision that not a single shareholder could have anticipated. A quiet decision, but one powerful enough to change an entire corporation and thousands of lives. Aurora Haven, Chicago, the crown jewel on Michigan Avenue, was the pride of the entire hotel chain. With its blend of modern and classic architecture, it was nicknamed a home among the clouds for its gold-leaf interiors, 6-star service, and a long list of celebrity guests. But Gavin hadn't come to enjoy it. He had come to remember. As soon as he stepped through the revolving door, Gavin felt his heart sink. It was still the same dazzling lobby, the same player piano softly weaving jazz by the fireplace, and the same signature essential oil scent of cedarwood blended with bergamot. But he felt empty. Standing silently beside a bronze statue, one he had personally selected from a then unknown artist, Gavin scanned the room. Everything was still perfect. It was only he who no longer belonged. No one recognized him. There were no appreciative glances like the old days when he would personally bring water to a guest. There were no friendly laughs from the janitorial staff, like back when the hotel had just 2 floors and a vending machine that always jammed. He approached the reception desk, where a young woman was focused on her keyboard. She looked up, her eyes bright but not prying, professionally gentle. On her chest was a neat name tag, Elena Reyes. "Good evening, sir. How may I help you?" "Jake Harper. I have a reservation." Elena nodded, her hands flying across the keyboard. "Yes, a room for 1 night. 11th floor, city view. Here is your key. And if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to dial 0. Gavin took the dark blue key card, giving a slight nod. "Thank you, Elena." Her name made him pause for a beat. It was his mother's name, too. Walking past a gallery of photos lining the hallway, Gavin unconsciously stopped before an old black-and-white picture, a group of employees standing on a vacant lot, the frame of the very first hotel still under construction behind them. His face, back then young, thin, covered in dust, but radiant, was still there. No suit, no halo of success, just the belief of a man who had never learned to give up. Gavin stepped into the elevator, watching his reflection in the polished steel. The man in the mirror looked back at him, hair flecked with grey, a day's worth of stubble on his chin, dark circles under his eyes, but beneath that exterior was still the gaze of the boy who used to deliver newspapers at 4 a.m. and bend over to clean toilets in a cheap motel for $6 an hour. Room 1117 had the exact design he'd approved years ago: oak-panelled walls, heavy smoke-coloured linen curtains, a soft brown leather armchair that seemed to embrace whoever sat in it. It was all perfect, but Gavin didn't linger. He set his bag down, adjusted his collar, and walked back out of the room. Because he knew to find the heart of a hotel, you couldn't lie on soft pillows and a plush mattress. You had to go downstairs to where the real things were happening. And it was there, in the corner of the ground floor cafe, next to a steaming cup of black coffee, that Gavin would hear something that he would never forget for the rest of his life. The hotel's Solstice Lounge was located in the West Wing, a space that was half warm, half quiet, with amber-colored lights casting a glow on the walnut tables, as if to soothe all thoughts. Here, Gavin chose the last table in the corner, a spot where the light couldn't reach the bottom of the black coffee he had just ordered. He wasn't hungry, nor was he thirsty. But the gesture of stirring his coffee with a silver spoon kept his hands busy so his heart wouldn't feel so restless. The cafe wasn't crowded. A few groups of business people were discussing contracts. A tourist family was choosing dessert. And then there were them. A young couple had just sat down at the table behind him, separated by a single chair back. The soft scrape of a chair, the sound of a coat brushing against the fabric. Then, a woman's voice, soft as a breath, but loud enough to make Gavin freeze. "Are you planning on sleeping in the car?" A man's voice answered, low and raspy, as if his throat had long been dried out by the winter wind. "It's just for 1 night. I can handle it. But today is our 2-year engagement anniversary." The young woman paused for a moment, then sighed. "I just wanted One normal evening. No hiding, no explaining, no feeling. Like an outsider in my own life. Gavin's hand stopped. The coffee spoon ceased its motion. The jazz music suddenly felt distant, like an echo from another world. He didn't dare turn around, but his mind was already spinning. Every word, every silence between them was like the steady cut of a knife against the wall he had built around himself for so many years. He listened, and the next part of their conversation was what reminded Gavin of himself 30 years ago. A skinny young man who had said the exact same things to his mother in an old car parked in front of a 24-hour motel. We were going to stay at my brother's, but there was a gas leak this morning. The police had to evacuate the whole building. I checked everywhere. Every hotel around here is fully booked. I'm sorry. I know it's expensive here, but I couldn't let you sleep in the car on a day like this. Mia, we'll figure it out, even if we have to drain our account. The man's voice, Gavin would later learn his name was Tyler, held no blame, no exhaustion, only a calm resignation that was heartbreaking. And the young woman named Mia, though her voice was gentle, exuded a courage that was both ordinary and extraordinary, the courage of someone who refuses to let poverty strangle their love. Gavin tightened his grip on the coffee cup. His palm was hot, but he felt a chill run through him. He no longer heard the clinking of silverware, no longer saw the yellow light reflecting on the tabletop. He only saw the ghost of his mother, sitting beside him in the car on a snowy night just like this, holding his hand and saying, "As long as you get a good night's sleep, I don't mind being a little cold." That sentence had followed Gavin his entire life, and now it was being repeated in a different form by a different woman, for the man she loved. He didn't know who Tyler and Mia were. He didn't know where they came from. But he knew one thing. They were the reason he had started Aurora Haven in the first place. Not to serve the upper class sipping champagne on the top floor, but so that someone in the middle of a cold winter could find a peaceful night, a place with light, warm water, and a decent bed. And in that single moment, Gavin understood he had forgotten the most important thing. The steam rose from the charcoal-coloured porcelain cup, but to Gavin, it wasn't the bitter, fragrant scent of Arabica, but the scent of memory. A memory that was both warm and aching, like a scar he thought had healed, but which could be reopened with a single familiar word. He saw himself at 20, his face smudged with plaster dust, his hands calloused from cleaning chemicals and torn gloves, waking up every morning at 3:30 a.m., biking through the rain to a carpet cleaning factory, then catching a nap during his lunch break on a plastic chair in a hotel parking lot. In the evenings, he worked the housekeeping shift where the smell of bleach clung to his skin until the next morning. Every week, Gavin ate nothing but hard-boiled eggs and stale bread to save money. He once sat for hours in his car just to charge his phone using an outlet outside a convenience store. But he never complained, because every penny he saved, every single cent, went to pay for his mother's medical bills. That Mother Isabel Cross had been a gentle and patient elementary school teacher. She was diagnosed with terminal ovarian cancer just after Gavin turned 19. They lost everything. Bit by bit, the house, the insurance, the car, even their hope. But there was one thing: Gavin never let his mother lose the peace she felt every time she saw her son still standing strong. He remembered that fateful night so clearly. It was after she had just finished her last round of chemotherapy. She was half her former weight. Her hair had mostly fallen out, and her hands were as cold as ice, but her eyes still shone with love. Gavin couldn't bear the thought of her returning to their damp basement apartment with the dripping pipes and the smell of mildew creeping up the walls. So he did something that, for him at the time, was a reckless gamble. He rented a hotel room for $42, his entire bank account. The room was tiny, the bed a bit lumpy, the hot water pressure was weak, and the TV had no remote. But that night, his mother got to lie on white sheets, rest her head on a real cotton pillow, and have Gavin tuck her in and tell her stories, just like when he was a child. She had fallen asleep in the middle of an unfinished story, and Gavin sat watch all night, just to make sure she was sleeping peacefully. He never forgot that moment, not because the hotel was special, but because of the miracle that happened in the most ordinary of spaces, a person being treated as if they mattered. That was the first and the last time his mother ever slept in a hotel. She passed away 3 weeks later, and from that day on, Gavin carried a silent promise. One day, I'll build places clean enough, warm enough, decent enough so that no one has to choose between the cold of their car and the shame of walking into a hotel. He thought he had kept that promise. With 80 locations, thousands of rooms, and an elite service team, Aurora Haven was called the second home for the successful. But now, listening to Tyler and Mia, Gavin realized a painful truth. He had built an empire, but he had forgotten the very people it was built for. Dawn seeped through the towering glass panes of Aurora Haven, spreading strips of golden silk light across the marble floor. The lobby grew warmer, but the atmosphere remained formal, everything still designed to keep guests quiet and emotions from being displayed too openly. Gavin had been sitting there since 6:45 a.m., same old jacket, same untouched black coffee, same spot in the far left corner of the dining room where few would notice him, but where he could see the entire space. And then they walked in, Tyler and Mia. No one paid them any attention. They weren't a well-dressed couple in expensive trench coats or carrying designer handbags. Tyler wore an old flannel shirt, its collar slightly rumpled. Mia wore a grey cardigan wrapped tightly around her like a layer of armor against the invasive world outside. They didn't look for a seat by the window where the view was best. They chose a modest table near the wall, slightly in the shadows, as if trying not to be a bother. Gavin didn't look at them directly. He watched them through the reflections in the glass and observed the staff's reactions. But what caught his attention the most wasn't how they walked, but how they sat. Tyler gently pulled out a chair for Mia. She sat down and smiled. It wasn't a polite smile, and it certainly wasn't a smile of complete happiness. It was the smile of someone accustomed to hardship, who still tried to give the best of herself to the person she loved. Gavin watched as Mia split a croissant in two. She placed one half on Tyler's plate and the other on her own. They took exactly 2 hard-boiled eggs. An apple was neatly cut into 6 slices. Everything was divided equally, no excess, no shortage, no room for luxury. It wasn't about being frugal, it was about cherishing. They cherished every moment they could sit and have breakfast together, in a space free of car horns, overdue bill notifications, and the cold that seeps through a wool sweater. And Gavin realized something astonishing. They didn't need a hotel. They needed a moment to be human. He exhaled slowly, partly from emotion, partly because he was afraid that if he breathed too deeply, tears would well up. For the first time since the days he cleaned toilets for guests, his hands began to tremble, not because the coffee was too hot, but because the truth was too clear. In thousands of strategic plans, market share analysis meetings, and launch parties for 5-star suites, Gavin had never once considered a class of guests like Tyler and Mia. And yet, they should have been the reason he started it all. He quietly set his cup down. He looked out at the lobby where staff were beginning to open the buffet, and there, in the small movements of that couple, Gavin saw a part of himself again, gentle, restrained, and never demanding anything beyond simple normalcy. And in that same moment, in the early morning light, Gavin decided he would not remain an outsider to this story. But he wouldn't intervene as a CEO. He would do it with his heart and with his memory. Gavin stood up, coffee cup in hand, and walked slowly toward their table, as if he were just another random guest. He stopped at the empty chair. "Excuse me, would you mind if I joined you?" His voice was low, polite, and carried a strange sincerity. Tyler was slightly startled, but nodded courteously. "Yes, of course. Please." Gavin smiled and pulled out the chair. "I'm Jake," he said, "here on business. But I usually eat breakfast alone, and sometimes being alone makes the coffee taste bland." Mia narrowed her eyes slightly, as if trying to discern if this man had a hidden motive. But Gavin's gaze held no scrutiny, just the eyes of a man who had seen much, weary but warm. "I'm Mia. This is Tyler," she replied, softly. A short silence passed over the table, not tense, just the kind of quiet that exists between strangers who are beginning to feel safe. "Are you two in Chicago for a vacation?" Gavin asked, stirring his now cold coffee. Tyler gave a small laugh. "Not exactly. We were supposed to stay with Mia's brother for a few days, but his building had a gas leak yesterday. The whole block had to be evacuated. We had to find a place in a hurry, and this was the only hotel with a room left," Mia said, her eyes fixed on the croissant on her plate as if it were her most precious possession. "The city is beautiful, but expensive." Gavin nodded, saying nothing. He let the story lead itself. "He was planning to sleep in the car," Mia added, her gaze shifting to Tyler. "But yesterday was our 2-year engagement anniversary. I didn't want to remember that night in a parking lot." As she finished the sentence, Tyler gently squeezed Mia's hand under the table. Gavin smiled, a sad smile. "How long have you two been together?" he asked. "Almost 5 years." Tyler answered, "We got engaged 2 years ago. But Things just keep getting in the way. My mum has a heart condition. I work as a mechanic, and I pick up extra shifts at the garage on weekends to cover her medication. Mia teaches art at a public school. The pay is low, so she tries to sell her paintings online to have extra money for supplies. Mia let out a quiet laugh. A lot of people look at the paintings, but not many buy them. Gavin listened, not rushing them, not showing pity. He just listened with the whole heart of someone who had lived through everything they were describing. There were times we thought, maybe we should just postpone the wedding for a few more years, Tyler said, his voice slowing. But then we realized time doesn't make things any better. We just needed one night. One night where we didn't have to count every penny. One night to feel like we were still people, not just a burden. Gavin turned his face away slightly. He didn't want them to see his eyes starting to water. One night, just one night, to be human. The phrase felt like it was being carved into his soul. He thought of all the board meetings he'd sat through, where people only talked about quarterly growth, break-even points, and return on investment. No one ever asked, how many people walk through the doors of this hotel just for a chance to breathe? No one except Tyler, except Mia, and except his mother, all those years ago. As the silence stretched, Gavin spoke softly. My parents weren't wealthy either. They used to tell me that the kindest thing you can do for someone is to make them feel seen. He looked at them, his gaze certain. Thank you for reminding me of that. Tyler looked surprised. Mia pressed her lips together, her eyes glistening, but she held a polite smile. Gavin stood up, placing a hand lightly on the back of his chair. I should let you two finish your breakfast in peace. But if you're still here tonight, I suggest you try the sour cream pancakes at the rooftop restaurant. It's not on the menu, but if you say Jake sent you, they'll make it. Mia tilted her head, curious. Do you come here often? Gavin winked, half joking, half serious. Often enough to know the chef always keeps a separate batch of pancake batter for kind people. And then he walked away. But in Gavin's heart, every step was a decision that had been quietly forming, now waiting to be turned into an act of kindness nameless, without applause, without a sign, just one human being to another. Gavin walked out of the dining room without rushing. The early morning sun streamed through the glass roof, creating long streaks of light on the marble floor, but he saw nothing but the sound of Mia's voice, still echoing in his head. One night, to feel like we were still people. His heart beat slowly, but deeply, and his hand, the hand that had signed contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, was now clenched at the hem of his jacket, as if to hold back something overflowing from his chest. He turned toward the reception desk. Still standing behind the counter was Elena Reyes, the young receptionist with the steady eyes and a way of speaking that felt like talking to family, not a VIP guest. Gavin leaned forward slightly, his voice low, like a man who had just awoken from a long dream. Good morning, Elena. Elena looked up, her smile gentle. Good morning, Mr. Harper. Was everything all right? The coffee at Solstice was a bit strong today. Gavin let out a soft laugh. It was a small detail, but it was enough for him to know she was someone he could trust. He leaned slightly toward her, lowering his voice just enough for the two of them to hear. "I need to ask you for a favor, something important and discreet." Eleanor didn't blink. She nodded, not rushed, not flustered. "Of course, sir. Go ahead. There's a couple who will be checking out in about an hour." Gavin said, "Tyler Sanders and Mia Reyes. They're in room 1117. Elena typed a few keys, then nodded in confirmation. "That's right. They're scheduled to check out at 11 a.m. Gavin took a deep breath. "I want their entire stay to be complimentary. The room, taxis, all fees, and then refund the charge to the card they used. But please, don't say it's from me. If they ask, just say, 'A guest overheard their story and wanted to do something kind.'" Eleanor was slightly surprised, but she didn't let it show. She just tilted her head slowly, her gaze shifting from the clock to the face of the man before her, as if she understood more than what he was saying. "I'll take care of it, discreetly, just as you asked." Gavin nodded, then hesitated as if he'd just remembered something. "And I want them to have dinner at the rooftop restaurant, the corner table by the window. Whatever they want, as long as it makes them feel they deserve a decent night." Eleanor smiled. It was the same smile his mother had when she received the birthday cake Gavin bought with his first paycheck from washing dishes. "Yes, sir." And if they ask why, Gavin raised an eyebrow slightly, then replied, "Just say, the person left before they could be thanked. That will be enough." He turned and walked away, not waiting for another response. All that was left was the sound of his footsteps fading, blending into the quiet hum of the luxury hotel lobby. But where Eleanor stood amidst the splendid reception desk and the strict management forms, something had quietly changed. Kindness, real kindness, with no signature required. 10:53 a.m. The hotel lobby began to fill with its familiar sounds, the soft roll of suitcase wheels on the marble floor, the murmur of conversations, and the receptionist's voice, like the prelude to a series of brief goodbyes. From a hidden corner beside a stone pillar, Gavin stood still, pretending to read a directory sign. He wasn't looking directly, but his eyes were fixed on the elevators. And then Tyler and Mia appeared. Tyler was pushing a dark suitcase. His jacket was slightly askew. The collar popped from a stuck zipper. Mia held a paper coffee cup in one hand and the room key card in the other. Her expression was both awake and subdued, as if the night before had been a dream she didn't want to wake from. They approached the reception desk, stopping right in front of Elena. Elena looked up. Her face was no different than usual, calm, professional, but her eyes held a new, unusual warmth. "Good morning, Mr. Sanders, Ms. Reyes. Was everything to your liking last night?" Mia smiled faintly. "It was wonderful. Thank you. It was a special night." Tyler nodded, handing over the key card. "We're here to check out." Eleanor took the card, typed a few quick keystrokes, and then paused for a beat. She looked up, her eyes seeming to blur slightly with emotion. "Actually, there's been a small change to your reservation." Tyler and Mia looked at each other confused. "Last night, Elena continued. A guest happened to overhear your story. They didn't leave a name, but they did leave a request. Your entire stay has been paid for, and... She paused, her lips curling into a gentle smile. Dinner tonight at the rooftop restaurant at the table by the window is also part of that gift. No need to pay it back, no need to know who sent it. Mia was speechless. Her hand gripped the coffee cup so tightly it nearly crumpled. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. Tyler stood frozen for a long moment. He didn't blink. Then he managed to say just one thing, very quietly. Are you kidding? Eleanor gently shook her head. No, I'm not. They only asked that if you asked why to tell you this, because kindness still exists in the world. Mia let out a laugh, a broken sound, mixed with the tremor in her throat from holding back tears for so long. Then she brought a hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Tyler blinked repeatedly, as if checking to see if he was dreaming. He looked around at the grand lobby, at the cafe, at no one he recognized. We didn't expect this, he said, his voice trailing off. But if you can, please, if that person is still in the hotel, tell them. Thank you, not for the money, but for making us feel seen. Elena nodded, her eyes glistening. Message received. Tyler squeezed Mia's hand. And then, without another word, they left the counter. They walked across the lobby. They walked past the spot where Gavin stood silently behind the marble pillar. They didn't see him, but he saw everything. And in that brief moment, Gavin Cross, the man who had built hotels to serve millions of strangers, knew that he had just done the right thing for one person in particular. There was no applause, no spotlight, just the morning light silently flooding through the glass windows. And in that light, Gavin smiled for the first time, not because of profit, but because of people. A week later, Gavin Cross sat alone in his 42nd floor office at Aurora Haven's headquarters in Manhattan. Outside, the winter sun reflected off the mirrored skyscrapers, and the traffic below flowed slowly, like an endless stream of thoughts. But Gavin wasn't looking outside. He was looking down at an old notebook, a dark blue, faux leather cover, its corners frayed, its spine worn by the years, an object he had long forgotten. He turned to the first page, and like a silent punch to the heart, the first line appeared in his sloping handwriting from long ago. We don't just rent rooms. We give people a place to breathe. Gavin closed his eyes. Back then, as a young man living with his mother in a basement apartment, he had written that line one evening during a power outage. A flashlight wedged between two books, papers scattered on an old bed, and a dream of a place peaceful enough for someone to forget the world crumbling outside. And now, after decades and millions of guests, after gold-leafed buildings and international hotel rankings, Gavin realized he had strayed too far from those simple words. He uncapped his pen and wrote directly below the old line, "How can every night at Aurora Haven become a chance for someone to feel seen. The story of Tyler and Mia wasn't just a fleeting, touching moment. It was a wake-up call, an echo from the past. It was the stark truth that thousands of people walk into a hotel not for a vacation, but to find a sliver of faith for just one night, to not feel like they are failing. Gavin opened his laptop. His hands were no longer shaking. They were resolute. The first line appeared on the screen: Aurora Light, a humane sanctuary in a cold world. He began to write the plan: a silent fund, integrated into the operating budget of every Aurora Haven hotel. No advertising, no PR stunts, no complicated conditions, no proof of hardship required. Frontline staff like Elena would be trained to recognize the signs: a guest who is exhausted, who has just been through a crisis, or who simply needs a look of understanding. Once identified, the fund would quietly help them a complimentary night, a gifted dinner, or simply a letter placed in their room letting them know they are not alone. The program wasn't designed to boost brand scores. It would not carry Gavin's name. It was only for people like Mia, who never asked for help, but whose eyes held a silent plea: I just need someone to believe I am worthy of a moment of peace. Gavin paused, sighing, not from fatigue, but from knowing he had finally returned to where he started, but with more mature eyes, and a heart that was no longer lost. He picked up the phone. He called Grace Lynn, the chief operating officer for the entire chain. Grace, I just sent you a document. No meeting, no press. Just a quiet project. I want you to implement it nationwide, on the other end of the line. Grace didn't ask why. She just replied, Yes, sir. I recognize that tone. It's the tone of someone who's no longer waiting for a miracle, but is about to create one. Gavin nodded and hung up. He turned back to the old notebook and underlined the first sentence: what if one night could change everything? And below it, he wrote in a firm hand, it already did. That morning, no one in the Aurora Haven system knew they were about to witness something unprecedented. The 5th floor of the Aurora Haven flagship on 5th Avenue, New York, was set up for an internal executive meeting. No banners, no PR materials. Just a simple sign at the door: Aurora Light. Internal briefing. Attendance required. Over 150 people were present, general managers from major cities, mid-level supervisors, heads of reception and guest services. Everyone assumed it was a quarterly review, perhaps dry, perhaps stressful, but certainly nothing out of the ordinary. Then, at exactly 9:00 a.m., something unexpected happened. 2 strangers were led in and seated in the 3rd row, a spot reserved for honored guests. A few people glanced over. The man wore a blazer that was a bit too large, his shoes clearly having seen many rainy seasons. The woman was simply dressed in a navy blue dress, a grey shawl draped over her shoulders. No one knew who they were. Only Gavin Cross, standing behind the stage, knew exactly. Tyler and Mia. Mia whispered in Tyler's ear as the room buzzed with conversation. Are you sure we're not at the wrong event? Tyler held her hand. I don't know, but I think something is happening. The house lights dimmed. A single spotlight illuminated the stage. And Gavin walked out. No suit, no tie, no polished shoes. Just a man with his sleeves rolled up and a sincere look in his eyes. No slides, no MC. He stood tall, holding a microphone, and said, "Thank you all for being here. I'm not here to announce targets. I'm here to tell a story." The room fell silent. Gavin recounted it from the beginning, the story of a man who went undercover in the very hotel he had built. The story of the couple he overheard in a cafe on a cold winter night. Not dramatic, not embellished, just every detail told from the heart. He paused when he got to the young woman's words. Just one night, to feel like we were still people. Gavin looked up, scanning the auditorium. That's when I realized. We've been so busy serving needs, we've forgotten to serve people. No one moved. The people who were used to analyzing data now seemed frozen in a sea of emotion. Gavin took a breath, then said, "And that is why Aurora Light was born. It is not a marketing campaign. It is not to increase our star rating. It is only to ensure that if someone like them, quiet, resilient, never demanding, walks into one of our hotels, they will never have to leave feeling they are not worthy." He paused for a few seconds. Then he turned to the third row, his eyes on the only two guests who hadn't been introduced. Tyler, Mia. If I have never said this properly, then today, in front of every person who makes the Aurora Haven system what it is, I want to say thank you. Thank you for reminding me why I started. The entire room turned. Nearly 150 pairs of eyes fell on Tyler and Mia, who sat there, stunned. Tyler's eyes were wide, while Mia brought a hand to her mouth, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. The whole room rose to their feet, not out of protocol, not on command, but because that sacred silence deserved an ovation. Gavin stepped off the stage and walked straight to the third row. He shook Tyler's hand, a firm handshake, between two men who understood each other's weariness without a word. Then he bowed his head gently to Mia and whispered, "I told you." The pancakes on the rooftop were real. Mia laughed through her tears. The light in the auditorium faded with the afternoon sun. The rows of pristine white chairs were now empty, leaving only the echo of applause and the sound of footsteps departing in silence, as if everyone wanted to hold on to that feeling for themselves. In the middle of the empty room, Tyler and Mia remained in their seats. No one urged them to get up. No staff came to clean. It seemed everyone understood this was a moment that should not be interrupted. Mia turned, her eyes still glistening but no longer trembling. "I still don't understand what just happened." Tyler let out a soft, slightly raspy laugh. "I'm not sure if I'm awake or dreaming either." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside the glass doors, the late afternoon sun cast a honey-like glow on the New York streets, seeping onto the edges of the empty chairs, creating a sense that the entire world was also pausing for a moment. "I think this all started with a cup of coffee," Mia said, her eyes fixed on the stage, "and a strange man who asked to share our table." Tyler nodded. "A stranger. And half a croissant." They both laughed. this time more gently. In their laughter was a sense of relief, the relief of people who had just walked through some invisible door in their lives. Mia rested her head on Tyler's shoulder. We used to think we just needed one night to not feel like failures. But now, one night made us the reason for a whole national program. Tyler said nothing, but he squeezed her hand tighter. In that squeeze was a thank you for not letting him sleep in the car that night, for believing that, no matter how cold the world was, a moment of normalcy was worth fighting for. Mia closed her eyes, her voice softer. I used to think the world only belonged to people with enough money to be seen. But today, I know that if just one person listens at the right time, even the most invisible person can touch the heart of an empire. A gentle breeze drifted through a crack in the door, carrying the scent of fresh flowers left over from the reception desk. The New York sky was shifting from pale orange to deep indigo. Tyler stood up and held out his hand. Let's go. I hear. The pancakes on the rooftop are real. Mia looked at him and smiled radiantly. Well then, we'll have to see if anyone keeps their promises like Jake does. As the two of them walked out of the auditorium, they didn't know that in a security room on an upper floor, Gavin Cross was still watching them on a monitor, silently. He didn't need them to know he was watching, because this moment didn't belong to him. It belonged to them, and to all those who would later be helped by a system that had learned to see people with kind eyes. A month later, the Aurora Haven headquarters in Manhattan received a package with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter in blue ink, the script round and slow, as if the writer had spent hours choosing the right words. The letter wasn't long, just a few lines. Thank you for not asking us what our income was. Thank you for not needing us to list all that we had lost. Because someone believed that kindness could come before any procedure. That day, we remembered what it felt like to be human. Thank you not for a night in a hotel, but for a night to breathe. T and M. After reading it, Gavin Cross said nothing. He folded the letter and placed it in a special drawer in his filing cabinet next to the old notebook with the line he had written so long ago. We don't rent rooms. We give people a place to breathe. From that day on, Aurora Light was quietly implemented in over 80 hotels across the country. No promotion, not a single line in the press. Only stories, passed by word of mouth in the hallways between shifts, a single mother whose car broke down on the way home, given a complimentary night's stay, a grieving couple who had just lost a child, who were checked into a room with a simple, handwritten note. We don't know what to say, but please let this place be your anchor. No one knew who the very first recipients of this grace were. Only a few receptionists would later recount that the story began with a man sitting quietly in a cafe who overheard a conversation not meant for him and decided to change the way this whole system works. In an internal meeting 3 months later, a new intern asked Mr. Cross, "Sir, I still don't understand. Why did we name the program Aurora Light?" Gavin smiled and didn't answer right away. He looked out the 42nd floor window, where the spring sun was shining down on the rooftops of New York. Then he turned back, his voice slow and deliberate, because sometimes a quiet ray of light is all a person needs to keep going. Because I believe the smallest light is enough to guide someone through the darkest night. And if you ever happen to walk into an Aurora Haven hotel at the very moment your heart feels its most weary, look closely at a small plaque, tucked away in a corner of the reception desk. It's not a logo, not a promotion, just a single line of text. If you are going through something that feels like too much, please tell us. No reason needed. We are here so you can breathe. Voiceover conclusion. Today's story began with a cup of coffee and ended with a wave of change. Quiet, but powerful. A man who remembered where he came from. A couple who found their sense of worth again. And thousands of unnamed people who would walk into the night with a quiet ray of light called Aurora Light. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do is to make someone feel seen, a stranger, a cup of coffee, a whispered phrase on a winter night, and then a hotel system that seemed to have forgotten its own purpose was reawakened by the simplest thing of all, the desire to be treated like a human being. Aurora Light didn't start in a boardroom. It started at a breakfast table where kindness needed no name. Perhaps you will never be in Tyler and Mia's situation, but if you ever see someone trying their best to look okay, remember this: just one act of kindness, no matter how small, is enough to create something great.